Cheyenne drove her horse to top speed and headed for the city gate. The 2 soldiers were right about closing it for the night, so no one can go in or out. Just some further unnecessary security measure of the king. But she couldn't take that into account right now. Without slowing down, they came closer and closer to the gate, and in the moment the guards noticed them, Falconheart had already rushed through, having the guards jump aside so that they wouldn't be ran over. As soon as she passed the gate, she steered her horse to the right, and she took a northern direction. She looked behind her to see where Adukas was. The fairy wolf ran closely behind them, but he didn't seem to be the only one. A few meters away from him the girl saw another horse galloping. It was very fast and carried a blonde rider. Xava. It didn't take him long to catch up with her and cantered next to Falconheart. Shiva, Xava's mare, was a little faster than the brown stallion and smaller. She had sensors as well in her long mane, but hers were pink. Just as Cheyenne's horse, Shiva came from a research facility, but one could tell that just by seeing her. She had no ordinary color. In the laboratory, research for the Knight's purposes took place, and those who are known under the name of Light Knights had owned the color they called white. There are legends and rumors about it in the Undercity, and it was called the Forbidden Color. And that's no exaggeration, since it was an artificial color that couldn't be found in the nature of Terranox Libertia. Oddly enough, though, there was one single spot where the color white could be seen, in the vitreous of the human eye, and nobody in the Undercity could explain why that's a thing. In the laboratory there was a lot of research for this color, and it became the trademark of the Knights. And they wanted to have horses in just that color so that everyone would know who they're dealing with. Shiva was such a horse, but something went wrong with the experiments, which happens a lot, and the Knights don't want horses which are not entirely white. Today most of them have got horses whose genes are manipulated, so that they carry the forbidden color, and due to that they are surely sentenced to a short life. Xava's mare would also never become as old as normal horses would become, but at least she got better chances than the white horses of the Knights. Falconheart's experiment went wrong as well, since his body didn't take the forbidden color, and thus both horses were sentenced to death. They got lucky though that Cheyenne and Xava always visited the horses in the research facility back then, and they noticed what had been happening, what should happen to Shiva and Falconheart. So the 2 friends freed them by night, and ever since then the horses were at their sides. The Knights didn't think it was necessary back then to regain the horses. The only thing they did was closing the research facility for publicity. Sometime after that they had built the high-voltage fence around Exiduma Magna and the city gate. Ever since that they started experimenting with humans too. Many people that couldn't pay their taxes had been transported there instead of being decapitated at once. In the Undercity, the research facility was known as Human Ranch due to that. There were rumors about the most cruel things about the ranch. Never had someone returned from there, and exactly to this laboratory they took Cheyenne's grandparents. Xava, what are you doing here? But instead of answering Cheyenne's question, he let Shiva run in front of Falconheart and cut his way. Then he suddenly stopped his mare. The brown stallion had no choice but to stop as well. The girl fell on the neck of her horse and got back up. Both horses were dancing around nervously and seemed to be confused about the sudden loss of speed. Shiva lifted up her front legs and whinnied shrill and powerful. Falconheart answered with an indignant snort. Are you nuts? What are you doing? Cheyenne's eyes narrowed and looked angry at Xava. I had to cut your way there, otherwise you would have never stopped. He tried to get the situation under control. His friend had to become calmer, but she didn't even think about calming down. I don't have time for this, and you know that. Let me pass this instant. If I come too late because of you, I will never ever forgive you. Cheyenne, calm down, will you? Do you really think you could save them if you just go there without any plan and without any care? Do you really think they will just let you walk in and watch you free two of their test persons? Are you really that naive? The girl looked away dejected, then stared at the ground. No, but what else am I supposed to do? If you got any better idea, then tell me. A few seconds they both remained silent. The only things that were to hear were the panting of the fairy wolf and the snorting of the horses. Xaver broke the silence at first. Listen, I know how much you wish to save your grandparents, but don't you see that the situation is pretty hopeless? Cheyenne gazed at him sadly before she started saying something too. I was taught to never give up hope. There is always a way. It seems to be difficult to save the two of them, but if I only believe enough in this and don't surrender, I will be able to do it. She was surprised how convincing and strong her voice sounded. Xaver looked at her seriously, then nodded. Very well. I guess I can't stop you, but then at least let me come with you, okay? Cheyenne was fine with that, even though she was worried. It was good to have Xaver at her side. She wasn't alone and she felt better with him around, but at the same time she had some worried thoughts. I hope we can make it somehow and save grandfather and grandmother, but I really get him into a dangerous situation here. But he is as stubborn as I am, and he would never just stay behind and let me go alone. To discuss things with him would only steal more time. Besides, he always remains calm, no matter the situation. He can think clearly, and I guess that's necessary there. And if it's the two of us, that's better than being alone. Besides, I feel safer with him around. Cheyenne and Xaver moved on, cantering side by side. The merciless rain fell down on them, and the wind made the grass rustle. The bright shine of Exidoma Magna that lit up the path up until now slowly faded. I can barely see anything now. It's way too dark. I can only make out the silhouettes of our horses, especially Shiva. One can see her bright color well even at night. Xaver regretted the thoughtless departure. He should have taken his chroma flashlight with him. I can see enough. Really weird how you are blind like moles in the night. I can't even imagine. Well, but you're hearing the hoofbeats on the ground, so you know where I am. Good that I know where the lab is, right? Cheyenne thought it was a pity that her friend couldn't see the beauty of the night. The plains they were riding along now were dyed in a pretty black that was brighter close up than in the distance. The grass's height was varying. In the distance she saw the begin of the forest. The rain made it difficult, though, to see very far. Xaver sighed. Blind like a mole? I would like to know how you see things in the dark. I can barely see my own hand in front of my eyes. His voice sounded sad and full of longing. He would really like to know how it feels to see well in the dark, but he certainly knew that that would never be happening. He shook his head and got rid of his thoughts right away. For a while the two remained silent, and Cheyenne had to think about her grandparents again. She really hoped that they were still alive, and that she would be able to save them. Her thoughts were disrupted, though, as she could make out some sort of light source in the distance. But at closer look it wasn't that far away, and the two friends stopped their horses. Adokas laid down in the wet grass and spectated the shine too. The shimmer came from a huge building that seemed similar to a fabric, and it lit up the night there. But it was no chroma shine, but white shine. This building was without a doubt the laboratory from which they rescued Falconheart and Shiva, and where they took Cheyenne's grandparents. Is that? But I thought it only exists in the upper city's noble quarters. Cheyenne was confused and unsettled because of the unnatural shine. Xaver stared at the color as well, in which the building was dived into. Yeah, you're right. It looks like the lamps in the noble quarters, but I thought they were made because the nobles ordered them. I heard they wanted to show their loyalty to the king that way. But why would they use them here? Chroma lamps shine way further than this white light. Cheyenne winced hearing that last word coming from Xaver's mouth and glanced at him angrily. "You dare speak out the forbidden word?" In the Undercity, the word light was connected to the nights and to evil, so it was never spoken out and forbidden. Children are learning this since their birth, that the word must never be spoken. If they do it regardless, a little punishment awaits them, so they don't do it again. Xaver knew his friend was correct with that one and was intimidated. "Oh yeah, right. But I heard how some of the knights called the lamps and the street lanterns that." Cheyenne sighed and looked at the lamps more accurate. They seemed like the chroma flood lamps at the marketplace of the capital city. Those were special lamps that had bigger chroma fragments in them so they could shine brighter and wider than normal chroma street lanterns. Just that these lamps here gave away some white shine, which was enormously bright but didn't shine very far. Chroma shine, though, reached very far. Against that, this light just reached a few meters. Also, there were no chroma fragments on these lights, but some kind of glass vessel with some kind of device which produced the shine. The longer Cheyenne looked at the large lamps, the more her eyes hurt. She no longer felt well and even got a headache. She could look at chroma shine for hours without feeling bad in any way. Xaver also seemed to feel something slowly because his eyes began to tear and he often blinked. Then he shook his head. "This light is terrible. You can't say that out loud. My eyes burn like fire." Cheyenne averted her gaze from the lamps and rubbed her eyes. The two rode on. Some large boulders surrounded the farm, and Cheyenne and Xaver decided to hide the horses behind one of them. Adoka slowly crept closer to the lab like a cat, the two friends close behind him. The building was huge and surrounded by separate fences. They almost looked like enclosures, and in some of them there were people and also creatures that the two had never seen before. The entrance was marked by a huge gate and a subsequent transparent tunnel. An enormously large triangular wall with transmitters at the top rose into the sky. Behind it were two differently large high walls, which were also separated by a large pyramid-shaped wall. The building behind the partition walls was larger than the one in between, and the enclosures emanated from it. The entrance was guarded by 3 knights.